once a week, once every 2 week sessions, stream of consciousness, where us as ex-developers, people that work at Red Hat, but with the technology, can just have a case of chew the fat, drink a beer, talk about some tech. On a weekly basis, there'll be different hosts, different people. We'll try and get lots of interesting people to come and talk. We've got some really cool stuff we want to show and share. Won't be very corporate, I'm afraid to say, for those people expecting some corporate stuff. This is pretty much going to be the level it would be in the pub, you know, at the sort of 6 o'clock in the evening kind of level, not 11 o'clock in the evening kind of level, which will be absolutely bloody awful. With me today is Graeme Colman, who is my boss and the nominal head of the UKI Developers, and Anthony Kesterton, a close friend and colleague who kind of does a really nice double act with me, as in Mr. Sane and Mr. Not So Sane, or Mr. Angry and Mr. Not So Angry. Is a good way of doing it. But I'll pass over very quickly to Graeme. Graeme can give a quick overview of his view of life and what he thinks we should be doing. So, want to go for it, Graeme?
Yeah, thanks, Uth. So this is kind of our pub, is it? So I can have a beer. I can start chatting about rubbish. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
You're meant to actually have a beer.
Oh yeah, I'm just opening my beer now. So
I haven't opened mine either.
The beer is just compulsory, by the way. It's just a chat. So
yeah, you can have tea as well.
Or you can have tea. You can have tea like Anthony. So
tea costs more.
Tea costs more than beer.
Yeah, it's a proper pub. You know.
In a pub, it would cost more. Yes.
Seriously.
Yeah. So I'm as Uth said, I head up the developer function in the UK and Ireland for Red Hat. What does that mean? So this is just a community thing, right? So Red Hat loves communities. Red Hat loves kind of building internally. And just building communities externally with partners, with customers, and you know, everything we do is kind of community focused, I think, and that's kind of some of the good things. So I run a community internally at Red Hat, and that's just really developers, engineers, architects, sales, whoever, anyone can join this community. But we're just a community that love talking about developer tooling, anything to developer tooling, and even not developer tooling. You know, we've got people that come on and talk about OS stuff. I don't know why, but we mainly focused on developer tooling. Talk a lot about OpenShift. Talk a lot about the languages that go on OpenShift. And I'd just like to encourage people to talk more in this community. So you'll find kind of blogs, these types of things. That we've got YouTube channels, and I'm just encouraging people to talk more about some of the things they're really interested in the dev space. So that's what I like. That's what I do.
Yeah, I was making the classic mistake of being on mute. I want to get a couple of post-its, you know, yeah, I'm on mute, and please help me, I'm on mute.
There was that t-shirt there, wasn't there? I think you're still on mute.
I actually sit at the wrong angle for t-shirts because I've got my laptop here, which means you can see out my nose. Unless I sort of do this, so you can see the rim of the hat. Yeah, so thanks for that, Graeme. I also invited Anthony here today because I'm always entertained when Anthony's on a call. Partly because
I don't know quite how to take that, Ian.
That's exactly why. That's exactly why. We were doing the conference, and you were introduced. I can't remember who introduced you, and basically he gave us good spiel on what the whole thing was. And the first thing you said was, "Oh, and now this is the interesting bit."
Yes. And now for the fun part. Yeah.
Now for the fun part. That was so cool. It was like, oh, absolutely superb. But yeah. So I've been working. How long have we been working together, Anthony? Is it about
4.5 years now, almost?
Yeah, I say. I still remember. I think it was the first day not the first day. The first time we had a meeting, you were in it, and you came from IBM, which I'll let you off this time. And you got us all to sit down and pretend to be parts of Watson. Do you remember that?
Oh yes, I do actually.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't Watson. So yeah, so there was. By the way, I'm Anthony Kesterton. I'm one of the solution architects at Red Hat. By the way, the same kind of thing as Ian I suppose, what Graeme used to do, except that I'm not a specialist, so I'm a generalist. So I know lots of nothing about many things, or something like that. And I'm not too bothered about not going into a pub since February. You what? Sorry?
You know lots, but you can play.
Okay, all right. I'm not too bothered. So I thought we should start the conversation with, what's the preferred drink of UKI developers? Is it tea or coffee?
Or beer?
We can get onto that later. Like the US people, they always think, you're a developer, you have loads of coffee and so on.
Well, I say when I was actually, because I used to be a developer, I used to work, work for a living, and I shared an office with this one guy for 5 years, and I won't say his name, 'cause he's a good friend of mine, and we actually started a company together. But he used to make the worst coffee in the world. He used to brew this. It was this coffee maker he never washed, so it was always dirty.
Oh yes.
And what he used to do is he used to come in the morning and he used to take the pot of coffee from yesterday, if there was anything in it, and he'd put fresh hot, I think it was hot lava java, this coffee thing, and he'd pour the coffee from yesterday into the water thing. And so for 6 years, all I did was write code and drink that coffee. And literally, I was sleeping about an hour a night, and I'm producing a hell of a lot of code, but the code was of interesting quality. I think too bad coffee quality. But yeah, I mean, it's going back to what we want to do with this kind of thing. We're incredibly lucky working for Red Hat in that we're at the coalface with new technology, with stuff that's coming out. And I don't know about the other guys, but I find it quite frustrating sometimes, because as I'm not a developer anymore, I don't get to use it. I don't get to play with it properly in Angular. I can see the ways in which it can be used, see the ways in which people can make a real difference using this kind of technology. Now, what we want to do as part of this this little bit of fun is want to get as many people as possible on here to talk about different aspects of the software that we play with, that we actually use. It's not all going to be product speak. We're not going to be talking about, I promise not to ever say, please go and buy this. I'm not sure if Anthony will or Graeme will, but this is all about just being aware of what's out there. Because I don't know about you guys, when I was a developer, one of the problems I had, and admittedly this was kind of, I'm not going to say we're old, because that's cruel, but when I started developing, the internet didn't exist. So you didn't have Google, so you couldn't go and Google, what's the latest version of Fortran to see what you could be using. Today is it's a different environment, and what I find, I don't know about, I'll open it up for you guys to talk about it. What I find very worrying and quite difficult about the way that things hang together at the moment is that there's just too much stuff, and I have a problem I want to do, and I literally don't know where to start. With the open source community, we make a point of coming up with the silliest names for things. I don't think I've ever seen an open source project where the name actually reflected what the thing did. So it's very, very hard. So one of the goals of this, and one of the goals of the stuff that Graeme's been doing, is to open these communities and get people thinking together, and also sharing a lot of information about what we've seen and what's coming and all these really cool stuff. And that was my kind of idea. But open it up, Graeme. What do you think about that? Is that the sort of thing we're aiming for, or are we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so quite often your choice of tool is limited because of corporate choices, because of everything that happens within organizations that kind of narrow down what you should be using from a technology perspective. But yeah, sometimes it's it's kind of the Wild West out there, and you get to pick and choose between bits of technology, some of which may survive, some of which may be a good choice, might not. Yeah, I mean, I like just talking about the everything that's coming out and everything that exists already, about kind of still putting things into good use. I don't want to plug a blog, but I wrote an article recently about not throwing things away because new technology arrives, and it was true 20 years ago. It's still true today. I think we always in IT we always try and reinvent things. Everything comes in cycles, but and for good, right? For good reasons. There's some of the cyclical things that we see make an improvement on what was good already. So when it's good, it takes the things that are good with whatever's been in the past, improves it, and we get a new cycle. So all for that, but not without throwing things away in spite of that is bad.
Yeah.
I think it's a real challenge because everyone keeps saying the pace of technology is increasing, which is true. But I think the combination of more and more projects out there, especially in the open source communities, people that develop for a living, who have to make technology choices or architectural choices even that are going to possibly not be the latest thing in a year's time, and yet still run a stable service, because ultimately they're writing software for a reason. And they've got customers that will depend on them, and they will depend on the software working so they can deliver that service. I think it's really, really hard. And I think what would be nice for these sessions, and what I'm hoping you guys will do, is really talk about these different technologies and actually give people an idea of what they're about, how they can be used. That may not be the right choice for your particular project right now, but on the other hand, it might be. And there's always going to be something new coming around. And I think the challenge that you have, and it's not just with open source projects, even commercial products where companies get absorbed or disappear or whatever, what are you going to put your bets on? Are you going to go for something which has been around for ages, is very stable, but not giving you all the advantages Graeme talked about? Or do you go for the latest thing and be prepared to throw it away in 6 months' time in the case of frameworks and front end stuff, perhaps a bit longer for back end stuff?
Yeah, I think so. We're in quite a privileged position, or some of you are, and then you get to see a lot of customers across a lot of industries.
Yeah.
So you look at things like finance, and actually even in finance and banking, you still have some very traditional technology inside of very large banks, but you also have part of that institution which is incredibly forward thinking, always looking to be on the edge of technology to gain the biggest advantage for what they're doing. And we also work in regulated public sector industries, or energy industries that are much slower moving, and whether they're a lot more cautious or whether they're just the pace of change required for run those businesses is slower. But we see both ends.
Do you think it's a hardware issue? So I know you used to work with a solution architect for an oil company for many years, and when you've got physical plant and stuff that's hardware, it's a bit harder to change than if you've got something which might also be worth billions in financial services, but it literally is just bits. And the only physical things involved are the data centers or the storage or the cloud provider's version of them. Whereas if you've got physical plant and so on, plugging systems into that, I don't know, just an idea that occurred to me when you were saying
sometimes just the nature of managing an engineering plant is that a lot of that management of the engineering plant will move slowly because they take a lot of design and upfront to get to a point of where they're efficient as an engineering plant. But sometimes the speed that we need in that engineering process just doesn't give the same advantages as the high frequency traders. So being on the edge of the technology advantages isn't as big a problem to solve for some manufacturing as it is with trading. But it is in some places. So some places in the energy company I worked with were absolutely on the bleeding edge because the advantage that the technology brought was vital for them to be competitive in the business that they were in. So yeah, they were absolutely bleeding edge, wanting to be finding the better solutions, always trying to find better solutions for whatever they were doing. So I think not just hardware, but what advantages is it bringing, and is it bringing business value?
Yeah, we had one of the customers I work with, one of the large multinational banks. They were talking to us the other day about changing certain kernel parameters to get better performance, and they were talking about, well, we immediately said, okay, you need to perhaps look at a real-time tuned kernel. I said, no, we don't really want that. We actually just want to change this one parameter. And there wasn't much we could do to help them. They would have to go away and do that and build it themselves. What we could do is take the real-time kernel bits that we have where you've got more exposure of various parameters, and then they're just going to try it and see if it helps them or not. So that's an example of a case where there's a bit of technology which is aimed at something completely different, because the real-time kernels are there to give you guaranteed service of your requests in effect. And at a more bigger software scale, that's what they're trying to do. But it's exactly the same thing you want on a plant. You know, you don't want to go and look at the value of that stopcock or that valve every 10 minutes or 10 minutes plus or minus 10. You want it every so many seconds, and that's where that kernel's typically used.
Actually contradicting myself. I think, so I worked on a project that was to do with refineries. And refineries generally tend not to change very much. But actually the outputs of refineries can drive, the profit margins hugely.
Yeah.
So depending on, the type of supply of fuels that come into, or the raw materials that come into the refineries, and depending on the price of the refined materials, refined hydrocarbons, it can impact what happens in that refinery massively. But the IT was very traditional, slow IT, and the refining engineers knew that actually they could do a lot better if they could change the parameters of which the refineries are set up and work out, what is the most optimum production mix given a forward-looking 5 months of supply. But they also knew that actually our IT systems have never been able to cope with that. So their processes kind of wrapped around what they thought their IT could provide for them. And it wasn't until the project I was working on kind of showed them that actually you don't have to be constrained by the IT you've got, because we can put things in place that give you these options. And that was kind of revelational for the refining plant that we were working with, in that actually we don't have to be constrained. We can work with some of the assay engineers and in the refinery to say, if you give us some IT that can do this, then actually, you know what, our options are so much more open to do this. And that was interesting because it turned them from a very traditional, very slow-moving IT within the refining industry into something that was much more modern, much more agile, and just the whole nature of what they were doing just completely transformed. Not only just the profits, but just the way they worked and just some of the culture within that industry, in that particular part of the business. So,
it's always interesting seeing those kind of changes in these industries where they're, traditional hardware companies, as you say, or that physical plant, and then adapting that to using some of the new ideas and technologies. I think this is the fun part, because going back to something you said earlier about how nice it is that we get to see so many different customer organizations and how they do stuff. And we can bring along ideas and thoughts, not only from one customer to another in the same industry, but also going across industrial boundaries. So years ago, I used to do a lot of stuff on use cases. I even got to work with Ivar Jacobsen, and he's actually got 2-3 sons and daughters. I got to work with some of them as well. And he's the person that invented use cases. And when you looked at a mobile phone network and the monitoring systems they did on that, and you compared it to what a trading floor is like, if you look at the use case model, if you just change the terms, it's exactly the same. So if you think about it, if you're monitoring a mobile network, you've got all this data coming in from the mobile network, you've got to establish networks there, you've got to see the connect, you want to be alerted when things change and so on. And if you look at a trading system, you'll have a head trader who is looking at the market. They need to be notified when certain events happen, massive jump in the dollar-pound exchange rate or something. And they're exactly the same. So you can take the same ideas and kind of twist them so that you can adapt new technologies into industries that traditionally wouldn't think of them. I think that's quite fun, actually,
Hmm.
being able to see that.
Do you know what, I worked, it was one of the mobile phone launchers not mobile phone, mobile network launchers in the UK.
Was it a
while
color,
ago.
perhaps?
It wasn't a color, but it was launched on the 3rd of the 3rd of the 3rd.
Okay, yeah.
2003, which might give you a clue. About the time, so the mobile networks had just opened up the frequency bandwidth for, to have the big frequency auctions, and some of these companies spent billions of dollars on or billions of pounds on buying the frequencies. So this network had no previous experience in running a mobile phone operator, a mobile network operator. No, it's none at all. It's a big company, but they were involved in shipping and in mining and all sorts of other things. But mobile operator networks, no. So I was a contractor there, and we spent two and a half years trying to build a mobile operator from zero.
Oh, you've frozen.
No networks.
Oh yeah, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry. So this company had
no, you froze momentarily, which was ironic given you were talking about networks.
Well, I've lost my train of thought now. I think it was just because we were growing this mobile network company from the ground up. It was just the most mad experience that I've ever worked with as in any job, because the decisions that were being made, we were throwing software together, it didn't work, so we threw it away, built more software based on someone else's idea, and just spent 2 years doing that. It was huge amounts of fun, but absolutely crazy as a place to work. I remember because they advertised this date that this network was going live. When we got to go live date, everyone was very much crossing their fingers, and when it went live, nothing worked. So we were all rushed back in. All this software we hastily created, we kind of threw it out the window and started creating spreadsheets and databases and just lots of scripts to move data from one place to another and present it to different systems. I don't know what made me talk about that, because what were we talking about? Some of the trading organizations looking like something else. It
was use cases being the same across all the organizations we deal with.
Well, you can have use case patterns, I think.
True.
Use case patterns.
That's true. I've worked in some very, very strange places, but the problems when you get down to it are atomic, and they're archetypal. They always are in different places. But there's something else I want to bring up as well, and that's I wonder how much of the change you see when you're dealing with various organizations is held back by comfort. And when I say comfort, I'll give you a good example of this. I love Java, and I will stand up and I will fight anyone who doesn't love Java and all those kind of things. But I've reached the point now where I find it quite hard to go and look at other languages to try and teach myself other languages because I'm so comfortable in the syntax of Java. So when something else new comes along that's actually better, I'm quite, I'm quite resistant to actually embracing it because I don't want to leave the comfort zone. I don't know whether that's just a side effect of age, because at the start of my career, I was just switching and swapping between all the languages and the frameworks. But I don't know about you two. I tend to deal with a lot of people who it feels like you're trying to change the direction of an oil tanker in terms of technologies. And in some cases, I think they're absolutely right. Some of the newer technologies, they're not proven. They're not things that you can jump to, and they do require a mind shift. I'll give a good example. Graeme is a good example of this with reactive programming. I can't get my head around reactive programming. And I should be able to, because it's what I was trying to write back in the days. But now it's there. I look at it and I just can't. It's like, oh, no. Where are the functions? Where's the main loop? Where's the kind of all these kind of things? So, I mean, how much do you think that comfort of the people that are actually writing the software and being involved with choosing the products and the frameworks and all those kind of languages, how much of that is impacting the speed at which normal people, the people actually doing the work, actually transition and change?
For me, it's so there are two things. I think when you look at large software projects, they're either driven, the technology choices are normally not driven by the developers. They're normally driven by the architects choosing and building, defining what that technology project is, how it's going to evolve and solve the challenges. Some of the lower level choices are made by developers in terms of, for me, it's not the developers that are writing code every single day. It's when I go and look at a project, I find that there's developers that are just day to day taking requirements, building in whatever agile methods, building software, and there's always a team or a set of team leads that are responsible for starting to define language choices and define even language choices. That's a decision made very early on in a project. But certainly some of the architecture choices, certainly some of the architecture choices influences that heavily. And sometimes what influences that is look at the market. Where is the market in hiring good people to build code? And sometimes it's just, especially with the Java marketplace, I can go to an SI and go to a lot of places and find good Java skills or good JavaScript skills. Move outside of that and you'll find it very much harder to find a steady supply of coding skills for different choices. So personally, I've got a different kind of view on it of whether I'm comfortable. So I'm very comfortable with Java, done Java for a very long time, but I've always loved dipping into other languages. I love JavaScript and Node, and I think Rust is some of the kind of the memory optimization or memory management with things like Rust is amazing. As amazing as coming from a C++ background into Java, where I didn't have to manage memory, into looking at things like Rust, where actually I don't have to worry about memory as much as I did in Java, and nowhere near as much as I did in C and C++. So,
and do you think those languages are more successful because the technology's moved on? You were talking earlier about cycles, which I totally agree that these technology waves come in. Like I'm fully expecting the wave where everyone gets out of cloud because they realize it wasn't quite as good as they thought of, and that's a kind of a macro wave.
It's already
Whereas
happening.
on languages, it's what is the architecture you're trying to build, what language is most appropriate, what mechanisms in the language make it really easy. Like I thought JEE stuff was always really clunky, all these annotations and so on.
It was horrible.
And I'm seeing that perpetuated in other languages as well. And you talk about reactive programming, and that's maybe a sign that the language itself is not suitable for that programming paradigm.
That's a very good point. I mean, we could just turn the clock back 20 years or 15 years and complain about JEE, because that was a terrible, terrible choice. But a good example of this is Go.
Was it a terrible choice, or was it just had problems?
Poor implementation.
I was doing entity managed persistence for too long, and I want those years back, please. But no, the example I was going to give today is Go. I can't get on with Go, and when I'm talking to customers and talking to people about it, there's a huge amount of people that absolutely love Go. But just the way the syntax hangs together, the way it does things that you couldn't do in Java, and because you couldn't do them in Java, it actually made sense not to do them. But things like multiple returns of variables from functions, I just can't get my head around that. But some people love it, absolutely adore it, and some people some people got a real bad feeling about Java. And I love Java because I just love typing. I just can't get enough about typing. It's just.
I thought you'll do definitely with Java. You'll do a lot of typing.
Oh yeah, the verbosity is just incredible. But I'll take me on to another question I want to ask you guys as well. IDEs. Now, this is always contentious. Whenever you talk to anybody about their favorite IDEs or their favorite way of writing code, you always get a different answer, and you always get people. It's an almost religious battle. I grew up with TextPad, and I grew up with Visual J++ and the old style Visual Studio stuff. Yet today, we've got VS Code, which is a very good editor and very good IDE and all this, but I find myself pissed off all the time using VS Code. It just irritates me. It does things I don't want it to do, and I can't change the configuration to stop it doing it. But some people live and die by VS Code. So this is just another quick, beer-related question, but VS Code or Vi? Or something in between? Graeme, go first. VS Code or Vi?
Yeah, when I first started using VS Code, I used it like Vi, because I came from Eclipse was my choice of IDE, mainly through having to work with WebLogic stuff and the WebLogic Studio, which was Eclipse based, and the JBoss Studio, which was Eclipse based. And Eclipse was great, right? Eclipse had so much power.
It tried to do too much. It tried to do too much.
But you used the bits which made it powerful, and it made it powerful for you you're in a developer loop of whatever you needed to do. So when I switched to VS Code, I just treated it like Vi. It was just a text editor, and I couldn't really get on and translate the things I was doing with Eclipse into things I was doing with VS Code, because I think it's built to be simple. It's built to have simplicity. It's not until you start adding some of the things into there that Eclipse used to give me, and it only gave me people hate Eclipse because it was hideously complex. But it's comfort thing about knowing your tool is fine. And now I'm using VS Code much more to get much more parity with how I was developing in Eclipse now. So I've got that inner loop of it's bringing all the comfortable things that make you feel cozy into, and you know how to use them together. Once you get there, it's kind of fine. You can relax, and it's comfortable now. I know how to do these. I'm not fighting with it. So I think it's just time and being comfortable with how to configure and use the tools.
It's a paradigm thing again, isn't it? I mean, and it's usage. If you're used to something, you're comfortable with it. If it's new and it's doing things you don't expect, then yeah. I mean, to give away some age, but I started learning programming on Turbo Pascal, and the Borland editors were brilliant. They're very good.
The JBuilder guys?
No.
I thought JBuilder came from Borland.
Oh, it might have, but I was using it before it was really Borland. Oh no, it was called Borland, but then they expanded. So this is in the early 80s. I never touched a computer before. In fact, I wasn't going to university to study computer science, but I went to a lecture by the computer science first year lecturer, and he was so good. I thought, well, I don't really understand what he was talking about, but it sounded really fun. I think I want to do that instead of going to become a lawyer. So I ended up doing computers. But yeah, Turbo Pascal. And I think all these editors, again, have a context. And if you're used to a particular context and a way of switching, then that's fine. So Vi is really good. I've got muscle memory on Vi, which I don't know how I remembered some of the obscure commands for Vi, but I do remember them. And it's fine. But on the other hand, I can pick up some of the newer IDEs and things like VS Code and so on. And I can get to use them in a very simple way quite quickly, and they will help me do stuff. But I think if I was doing coding a lot, I would find it annoying if I wasn't used to it because it would get in the way. Putting a closing brace. I know what closing brace needs to go and where. You don't have to tell me.
It's the automation drives me insane. It literally, I open a closing brace and it produces a closing one. But the other big thing that gets me, which annoys me a lot, is that it's like a dog that wants to be friendly. It's like a dog that really wants to help you, but all it does is lick your crotch. Because I'm typing something, and literally, I'll give you a good example. I'm typing one line, and I'm doing a nasty little algorithmic thing on one line. And I go on to the next line. I think, all right, I really need to refer back to what I've done on the previous line. And you're halfway through typing, and it's popping up these boxes over the line above, and it's like, go away. And all I'm doing is typing, pressing escape, and swearing. Not in that order. It's typing.
I can hear you doing that. I could just imagine and hear you in my head doing that.
But I can't find the old editors that I love. I can't find them anymore. I can't find text edit. I can't find. I know I could neuter things and all this kind of stuff. So I tend to drop down to Vi, and I don't like Vi. Vi is. And the number of times, and please don't laugh out loud, the number of times my new code that I've written in VS Code is full of :WQ. It is literally always full of :WQ. I don't think, I'm halfway through, I think I say, I need to save this, and it's like :WQ. And then it's like, why won't this compile? Oh, it's got :WQ in the damn thing.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's mad.
In text editor, if I'm in a notepad on the Mac or something like that, the amount of times I've just typed in escape :Q or WQ, whatever it is.
Yeah, I bringing in some Red Hat technology. I was playing with Code Ready Workspaces, and Code Ready Workspaces looks like Eclipse, but it's clever in that when you're typing things, it's auto-saving it in the background because it's container-based. It'll auto-save what you type. And I was literally stopping every 5 minutes and pressing Command S to try and save it, and it was like, and then I spent 10 minutes trying to find the file save, and it was like, where's it gone? And I thought, yeah, I'm really getting too old for this. But no, it's one of the comfort things. I grew up with text edit, which was like a sort of, no, I tell a lie, I grew up with TextPad.
I was going to say TextPad.
Yes, it was like Notepad++, and it was like really sweet. But I also, I'm going to watch Graham catch fire at this point. I used to love NetBeans. But I used to love NetBeans because I grew up with AWT and Swing and writing AWT and Swing applications. And NetBeans is one of the few IDEs that was written in Java. And it had the horrible sort of like buttons and the horrible dialog boxes, but I felt so at home and so comfy. And like you tell that to people today that are developers, and they see how old you are.
Java Swing.
Swing, no,
I think one thing about
sorry, go on, Anthony.
I was going to say one thing about the newer IDs and so on, and the sort of latest generation of all this tech, is it does make things a lot more accessible to people. And so I think that the mystique of writing code and knowing all the secret commands and so on to get your editor to do something has gone away. And at Red Hat, we get involved in a lot of these young coder type things and young coder meetups and all that kind of stuff, running time for kids, and just making it really accessible to them is so nice because it just lets them try these things out, and it's really powerful, and it allows them to translate their ideas into something which is exciting and interesting much more easily. That's one thing to be in defense.
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, but I completely disagree. And the reason I completely disagree is I want people to think I'm clever. If anyone can do it, it's like anyone can do it. It's like, oh God, anyone can do it.
Yeah, you have to up your game, you see, Ian. Well, Ian's good because he writes books as well, so he's very good. He writes novels, very good novels.
Anthony is officially I think your third job title on top of the other ones you got is my press secretary.
Yes. Ian's books are really good. Go on to Amazon and look for Ian Uther Lawson. And if you like sort of murder mystery, bit of secret agent and the occult or whatever, what was really scary, I didn't realize Ian was an author. And when I met him at Red Hat, I think you let slip at one point, or someone told me, and I went and started reading his books. And for the first few chapters of the first one, I couldn't get Ian's voice out of my head. I could hear him saying the words. And if you've read any of his books, that's very, very scary. So we've since become friends, which is great. So.
This is a subtle hint for me to start writing again, right?
Yeah.
Just checking. Yeah. Also, as part of these sessions, I know we've been having a good session. I'm out of beer, so I might have to go for a beer in a second. But another thing we wanted to do is we wanted to show demos. We wanted to actually show some really cool stuff that was going on. So I'm more than happy to actually do a quick demo if you want to see something cool. You guys have probably seen it already. See if I can share my screen. And we got another guy on the call, Naz, who's quietly sat in the background, who's our executive producer, God person who runs. He's young enough to know how to use Twitch. And when he was showing us how to use Twitch in the first time, it really felt like someone showing his grandfather how to use a VHS, which I did. We're all sat around looking confused. It's like, what's Twitch? You know,
Yeah, it's a
this
good
like
thing Naz's
Twitter?
on mute, 'cause they'll be laughing at all the things
It's
that
like
we
Twitter, 'cause it
been
starts,
talking about.
it starts with TWI.
But you are laughing at us, aren't you? You think, oh, old fuddy duddies.
Yeah, yeah. So as I say, it's again, this is new technology for me, so I might completely utterly break it. So tell me if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
It's coming through. Cool. Yeah, I'll say
see it.
this is a very quick demo because there's this new technology we've got called OpenShift Virtualization, which is based on effectively the concept of virtualizing, running a virtual machine in a container. And basically, when I heard this, the concept of it, I thought this is insane. You know, why on earth would you want to run a virtual machine in a container? And I had terrible visions of, you know, these horrible, big, horrendous nodes and very poor performance and all those kind of things.
Layers upon layers.
Yeah, yeah, too many turtles all the way down. And I went, and one of the lovely things about Red Hat is I went to the people that actually write this, because of course we deal with the communities, we actually work closely with the communities. And I basically went and asked the guys that wrote it, I said, I don't understand what this does, and I really want to understand because it sounds cool. And they explained it, and it's actually really, really clever because what it does is that it runs a container, a launcher container. So if you know how containers work, this container actually runs on the worker nodes themselves, and it uses persisted volumes, which is the way to actually express a file system into the back of a container, as if it, you know, so the container itself can actually operate on it as part of its own file system. And the way it works with virtualization is that we have a number of these launcher containers which contain the bare minimum you need to interact with the kernel to actually run a virtual machine. So it contains the virtual machine libraries, it contains the overt libraries. And what it actually does is it bolts the virtual machine image as a persisted volume onto the back of the container. Now, you know, I normally talk for hours about this and it gets very, very tedious. So what I've been doing with demos to show people how fun it is, and I'll show you this very, very quickly. If I go to virtual, this is on OpenShift 4.6. And what I've done is I created 3 virtual machines in different ways. So I created a CentOS virtual machine, a CentOS Stream virtual machine from the CentOS Stream distributions. I created a Fedora machine by taking the Fedora ISO image and actually bolting that in as a persisted volume and then installing it to another persisted volume. So I got the virtual machine to fire up in the container. It read the ISO as if the ISO was running off of a CD. And it actually executed it as it would normally do if you've seen the Fedora stuff running. And then it offered me to actually just test Fedora or install Fedora. And I installed Fedora by actually installing a disk onto that container and installing it. And then I simply shut the virtual machine down, the container down, change the configuration of the container to boot from a different disk to get it to boot from the disk I'd installed it from, and then restarted it, and voila, it was working. But the fun one is the Windows one, because this is something I'm going to be honest. I've used Windows. You know, I was a Microsoft programmer. I liked
Windows is never
.NET.
funny.
I liked .NET. I learned Java on Visual J++, which is an exercise in pain. But we've never really been able to mix and match the Linux container, the Linux world, and the Windows world when it comes to containerization. And we've got the concept of Windows containerization now, where we can actually run Kubernetes jobs on a Windows box. But what this allows you to do is to basically run a Windows image as a virtual machine the same way you would run it as a virtual machine anywhere else. So what I've done is I actually built a Windows virtual machine somewhere else on VirtualBox on my Mac. I then exported it, I imported it and in the correct format, the QCOW2 format. But long story short, and all these kind of things, the lovely thing about this, and this is, you know, I like user interfaces and I like cool stuff, and I've always been a real fan of the OpenShift user interface because it just does things that I could never do when I was writing user interfaces. But one of the lovely things about this now is that it brings up the actual virtual machine in the user interface for OpenShift. So what I'm looking at here is a Windows 10 system, and that Windows 10 system is running as a virtual machine in a container on OpenShift. And what's really sweet about this, and this is where it gets a bit inception and things start to catch fire, is that that Windows virtual machine is running in a container. That container is running in OpenShift. OpenShift is running on a virtual machine on VMware. And that VMware is running on a piece of Intel kit in a room in Swindon. So it's like 15 levels of inception. And to make it even more confusing, what I decided to do is each of those virtual machines has an application running on it. So the Windows one has IIS. I installed the Internet Information Services package, which stands up basically a web server. On the CentOS one, this is where Graeme's eyes will light up. If I go and look at the CentOS one, you will see when I go in the console and log on. And I say if I can remember my password, so bear with me 1 second. I'm running a Quarkus native app. So I built a Quarkus native app and I'm running that on CentOS. In the Fedora one, I'm actually running a Node app, and I've actually exported all those applications through service points in OpenShift itself, and they can all call each other. And I know that's not sort of visually impressive, or think, well, maybe it is visually impressive, but for me as a developer, the ability to actually bring a virtual machine into OpenShift, stand up an application in that virtual machine, and then export that as a callable service point means that I can lift and shift existing legacy workloads. You know, I don't have to. And again, that's a bad thing. And I say this as a good thing and a bad thing. I say this to customers whenever I'm talking to them, is that this is fantastic that you can lift and shift without having to modernize your workloads. And it's absolutely bloody terrible because you can lift and shift without having to modernize your workloads. Because I don't know about you guys, when I was—
There goes your technical debt.
Yeah, when I was a developer, I would just jump at the fact I would always be wanting to modernize it, you know, because you have to, you know, if your software is 4 years old, 5 years old, it could be more efficient now. It can be less intensive, less of an impact. But you can now lift and shift. And the good thing is that everything that runs within OpenShift runs under the same software-defined network, has the same security protocols and all those kind of things. And you can export those services such that you can consume them. And then you could, if you want, modernize them without having to change the end applications that call them. So you could have a microservice calling a service that's being hosted on Node, let's say in a Fedora virtual machine. And then over time, you could move that Node application into a container, decommission the virtual machine without having to change the way in which the end application is calling it. And that, to me, I don't know what you two guys think of that. I think that's a lovely way to modernize it. It's a kind of almost a risk-free way of modernizing applications. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think there will be stuff. Sorry, I was going to say that I see this all the time. There is stuff which just cannot move to this new world of containers. It's just not going to happen anytime soon. You know, it'd be too critical. It's too dependent on technologies which don't really exist in the container world. By having a virtual machine but being able to manage it this way, I think has been really neat. I've been very impressed by what the upstream community done and how we've combined that with other bits and pieces into OpenShift. It has been very interesting.
Yeah, Graeme, what are your feelings on that?
I mean, it makes a really, really interesting demo and a lot of fun to play with. I'd like to get some ideas on, you know, where we see customers using this in anger and for what use cases. I think it's awesome, right? So the technology is awesome. I love it for being able to pull things in as a developer and try things out and given the capability to do that without having to have, you know, your access to other hypervisor tooling in the organization. I think that's going to be a huge advantage. I'd like to. I'm still yet to be convinced on, you know, solid use cases for, you know, for workloads running in a virtual container, in a virtual machine on a container.
Yeah.
Don't you think that any virtualized workload is potentially could be put onto this?
Well, it could be. But well, I'd like to see what that use case. I know any use case, but practically the use case. You know, in a context in a customer where I've got VMs running in my data center, or I might have, you know, I might have a, you know, them already running on cloud, but in in a hypervisor somewhere else, wherever it is, where is that use case that says it's going to be better for me to run a VM in my container cluster rather than the choices that I've got? And I'm sure there will be. I'm sure there are, and I'm sure there are some very much more. I mean, the example that Uth just given of having developers have the access to be able to create the virtual machines, which might be running on data center inside of the cluster to test and play with and build and use that as a test case. I love that. But it's those kind of wider business context use cases that this is a better option than what we've currently got.
Yeah, I was talking to the guys that wrote this, and they were saying basically that the kind of use cases they were aiming for was the stuff that you couldn't containerize. So the older operating systems that you've managed to get into a virtualized environment. And a good example of that is the Microsoft SVVP program, where Microsoft have basically blessed them. They've introduced the SVV program for 2012, 2016, and 2019 server workloads running as containers. So you can now run a container containing Windows Server 2012, 2016, 2019. And Microsoft will support it as if it is the operating system, which of course it is. Because what we don't realize, and one of the things that we need to make clear about this is that when we're running a virtual machine within a container, that virtual machine is running on the kernel as a virtual machine. It's not running as a virtual machine in the container itself. The container is basically the hypervisor controller. The kernel itself is running that virtual machine, which means you get the same performance that you would get as running that virtual machine on a hypervisor directly over the kernel. So, you could lift and shift an existing 2012, 2016, or 2019 workload from another hypervisor somewhere else into OpenShift. And one of the use cases I was pushing with one customer was they had a two-tier system. So they had a system where they had a back end with a database that they couldn't move into containers. They had a front end they could move into containers. And they had SLAs as to the response time when this composite system had to be up. And when they had to do an upgrade to the database, to change the database schema, they had some bad code at the front end that actually made direct SQL calls into the back end. So it had to know the database schema itself. And so to roll that out, they had to wind down the virtual machines with the database. They had to change the schema, bring it back up, rebuild the database, and do all those kind of things. They had to bring down the containers with the actual front end system. They had to update it and do all those kind of things. And they were saying there wasn't a single button they could press to do it. And they had to basically, it was very mandronic, very sort of single stage bot process. And they were looking to just ease that process of being able to redeploy composite applications without all the hassles and without the dependencies and sort of temporal stamping they had to do. And this actually kind of answers that, because if you've got it running as a virtual machine within the container space itself, it's a simple kubelet call to actually redeploy it and rebuild it and do those kind of things. So it went from being sort of 3 people doing manual tasks in the space of 6 hours to potentially one guy running an Ansible script or running a kubectl command or running some OC commands in the space of 20 minutes. So there are some interesting use cases out there, but you've really got to look for them. I think at the moment it's really at that point where this is a technology I personally think that's going to take off massively, but it's not quite there today, if that makes sense.
Is this so? This is my area, but does this run only on bare metal servers now, or are we?
No, interestingly, what you're looking at there, this demo I'm actually running is nested virtualization. So yeah, it's virtualizing onto the kernel, the nodes that are running, but those nodes are virtual machines.
How about EC2?
We support, Red Hat supports bare metal.
How about EC2?
Yes, we do. Interestingly enough, the reason I'm caging my bet slightly is this is a 4.6 system. With the 4.7 system, which is due imminently, I've seen the user interfaces, and when you're installing the operator for virtualization, it prompts you as to where your nodes are in terms of bare metal or not. Now, the fact that the user interface now prompts you says to me that we've got some efficiencies coming in which allow you to run nested in there. Because originally this demo was running on top of another type of virtualization, and nested virtualization performance was poor. The Windows, I'd move the mouse and it would take a couple of seconds for the mouse pointer to move. I'm not. This is not. This is this is not a push for VMware, but this is running on top of VMware, and VMware seems to be very good at doing nested virtualization. So I don't see a reason why it can't be supported, and it's part of the user interface. But again, as of the current release we've got, it's only supported on bare metal nodes.
So I can see I've got a customer who is just moving all their workloads to public cloud. Now this would be a great use case for that, because they do have stuff that's running in virtual machines on platforms that are not supported by the public clouds.
Yeah.
So providing them a way to get workloads running in public cloud on the virtual machines that they've got, on the VM instances, images that they've got, is a great use case for them.
Yeah, I think it has to get there, because the majority of customers, we're at that point in the wave, or that point in the cycle where a lot of people are going to cloud as opposed to coming back from cloud. So yeah, it's a part of the market we have to address. But anyway, I mean, so that was just a very, very quick demo, and I'd say I'm going to stop it there because we're running up towards the hour. I've enjoyed it, although I only had one beer, because I need to get a fridge in here. That's the next step, is to get a fridge, so that during meetings I can just suddenly turn the video off and turn the sound off, so you don't hear me closing the door of the fridge.
You've got a fridge in your office, haven't you, Graeme?
Has he?
Yeah, just behind my door there.
Nice. Is it full? Is it a full fridge?
It's pretty full. It's pretty, yeah. It's
Well,
all
it
right.
was earlier today, apparently.
Yeah, earlier today it was full. Now, my problem is
Yeah.
I've got a son who's just turning 18, who's just discovering my beer fridge.
You need to get a lock then. That's an extra, a lock. Anyway, I'd say, yeah, we're just coming to the hour. Thanks for both being joining us today. What we intend to do is we intend to do this again periodically whenever we want to do it. Lots of people will talk, lots of hosts, lots of stuff. I hope it was vaguely entertaining. So I don't know how we actually finish this, because I'm not sure if Nas is just going to do this or just say, stop bloody talking, Ruth. You have to get a credit roll or something. You could just put it over us for just